Welcome to part 8 of our series on building a Zelda-like game in Phaser 3. Now that we have a state machine, it's time to define our player states. In this video, we'll implement different states to handle movement, idle, and future actions seamlessly. If you're new here, this is part of a full series where we create a Zelda-inspired game from scratch. Check out the playlist link in the description to start from the beginning. Let's jump in and bring our state machine to life. Now that we have our state machine in place, we can start building out our states. To get started, we're going to create a base character state, which will be our template that all of our other states will inherit from. This base character state will keep track of the game object that our state is associated with, and that way we can easily reference it. To do this, let's go into our code. Under our state machine folder, let's make a new folder. We're going to call this states. And now we'll make another subfolder. We're going to call this character. Let's make a new file, and we'll call it base character state. Let's create our class. Do export class. We'll do base character state. We're going to have this implement our state. Since we're implementing our state interface, we need to add our properties for our name and our state machine. For our state machine, we're going to make this protected since we're going to extend this class here and we need our state machine to be available to our child classes. So we're going to do protected, we'll do underscore, we'll do state machine. We'll do state machine for our type. Now for our state machine, we won't get this in our constructor, and so we're just going to do this not null. And now let's add in our setter for setting our state machine. So we'll do set state machine. We'll receive our state machine as our argument. And now we'll do this. Our state machine will be equal to our state machine that we just received. Now for our name, we're just going to make that private. So we'll do name. We'll set it to a string. And that we will inspect in our constructor. So we'll do our constructor. We'll have our name for our string. We'll do this.name will equal to our name. So now we just need to add in a getter for our name. So we'll do get name. We'll return our string, and we'll do return this, our name. One other property we'll add to our class is we want to keep track of our game object we're associated with. So let's do protected. We'll do game object. And for the time being, we're just going to type this to be player, since we don't have a generic type for our various characters in our game. Let's add that to our constructor. And so we'll have our game object. It'll be our player. And now we'll do this. We'll do our game object. Will be equal to our game object. One last change we'll do to our base character state class is we want this class to be our blueprint that all of our other character states will inherit from. We don't actually want to create any instances of this class. Instead, we want to create a separate class to represent our various states like idle and movement. To do that, we just want to make this class an abstract class, so then that way we can't create any instances of this class. Now that we have our blueprint in place, let's create our idle state class. Under our states character folder, let's do a new file, and we'll do idle state. Do export class. We'll do idle state. And we're going to extend our base character state class. Let's add in our constructor. Now for our constructor here, we're just going to expect our game object that will be provided. And so we'll have our game object. We'll add our type for our player for the time being. And now let's call super. And we need to provide the name of our state. For now, let's just do a string. We'll do idle. And now we'll pass in our game object. So for our state name here, we'll be referencing this in multiple locations, and so we're just going to move this to an object and follow the pattern that we've established in our code base. So under our states character folder, let's make a new file. We're going to call this character states. Let's export out const. We'll do an object, so we'll do character states. It's going to be equal to, we'll have our idle state, and let's do our move state while we're in here. Now for our values, we'll just match our keys on our object. And then we'll do as const to lock our object. Back in our idle state, let's update our string here. And so we'll do our character states, and we'll do our idle state. So before we add any more code to our idle state class, let's jump over to our player class, and we're going to create an instance of our state machine, and we'll see if we can actually get into our idle state. So on our player class, let's add a new property to keep track of our state machine. So we'll add our type, we'll have our state machine. So now down here, after we play our animation, let's add in our state machine. And so we'll do this. We'll do our state machine. This will be equal to a new state machine instance. And for our ID, we're just going to pass in player. Now let's add a new state to our state machine. So we'll do state machine, add state. We'll do a new instance of our idle state. We'll pass in this for a reference of our player instance. And now we want to call set state on our state machine. So we'll do this. We'll do our state machine. We'll do set state. And let's do our idle state. So we'll do character states, idle. Now if we save, we'll see right away when our browser refreshes in our console, we're going to see that our state machine was invoked. We called set state, and we changed from no state to idle state. So now back in our idle state, if we add our onEnter method, we should see that get triggered. And so we're going to do onEnter. And we're just going to do console.log test. Back in our browser, now we should see 2 additional log lines. We'll see idle state on enter was invoked, and then we can see our code is actually running. Now, if we want to test our onUpdate method, we'll do onUpdate. We'll have our type be void for our return. Let's do console.log. We'll do test2. Come back to our player class. Now we need to call the update method on our state machine. So down in our update method here, after we call normalized velocity, we'll do this. We'll do our state machine. Let's call update. So now if we save, we'll see in our console that test2 is being logged for every tick of our update loop. Now that we have our state machine working and we have our idle state working for our player, we're going to start moving our logic from our player class into our various states. So currently in our player class, this is where we listen for our input from our controller, and then we use that to play our various animations and move our character around our screen. Instead, we want to move the relevant logic to our idle and movement states, so then that way, when there's no input, we'll be in our idle state and we'll listen for input, and once we have that input, we'll transition to our other state. To start making this change, let's go into our idle state. When onEnter is called, the first thing we'll do is we want to play our animation for our idle animation when we're in our idle state. So if we jump back over to our player class, let's copy our code for where we do our idle animation. We'll copy this here. We're going to go ahead and paste that here. Let's get rid of our console log. So now instead of doing this.play, we're going to do this.gameObject.play. Now we need to update our imports. So let's add in our player animation keys and we'll save. After we play our idle animation, now we want to reset our body's velocity. So in our idle state, we don't want our player to be moving around. And so if we jump over to our player class, let's copy our code here for where we check for our arcade physics body. We'll paste that in our idle state. Then we want to reset our velocity. So I'm going to copy this code here for resetting our velocity. So we want to check to see if our body is an arcade physics body. So we want to get rid of our not. Instead of doing this.body, we want to reference our game object. So now we'll update our code down here. And then we want to reset this to be 0. Let's copy this line. We'll do the same thing for our y value. All right, so that's all we need to do for onEnter. Now in onUpdate, this is where we'll check for our input. And so as long as the player is providing some type of input, we'll go to our movement state. So now in our onUpdate method, this is where we're going to check for our player input. So if we jump over to our player class, let's come up to our update method. Let's copy our code here for we check for our controls to see if there's any input being provided. So I'm going to copy this here. Let's get rid of our console log. Let's paste that in. First, we'll need a reference to our controls from our game object. So we're going to do const, we'll do controls. It's going to be equal to this, our game object, and then our controls. So now to make our controls available to us, we need to jump back to our player class. We'll want to add a getter for getting that component. And so after our constructor, let's do get. We'll do controls. This will return our input component. So now we can return this, our controls component, and we'll return the controls property. Back in our idle state, we'll now have our controls. And so if there is no input, instead of playing our animation, we just want to return early. If there is input for our directions, now we want to go to our movement state. So we're going to do this, we'll do our state machine, we'll do set state, let's do our character states, and we'll do move state. All right, so if we want to test our changes, back in our browser, if we try to provide some input, we'll see our character moves around, and we have our warning message about trying to change to an unknown state. So now we need to create our move state. So in our character folder, let's make a new file. We're going to do move state. I'm going to come over to my idle state. I'm going to copy all the code from here and paste it into our move state. We'll update our class name. We'll do move state. Let's update our name. And so we'll do move state. And so now we need to tell our player class about our new state. So if we go over to player, go up to our state machine, let's create a new instance of our state. And so we'll do new move state. Now if we save, we come back to our browser. If we provide our input, our player will start moving on our screen. And we can see our code for changing our state is working properly. So now back in our move state, now we need to update our logic here to have all of our logic from our player class that we were doing in our update method. So this is where we're going to check for our input, and then we'll play our various animations and then actually move our player around our scene. So for our move state, we don't need to do anything when onEnter is called. For this, we'll just rely on our onUpdate method and we'll figure out which key was being pressed and then do the relevant logic. So we'll get rid of our onEnter method. Let's come back to our player class. Let's grab all of our code from our update method, except for our state machine update, and we'll paste that over on update. So we'll remove that from our player class, back in our move state. Let's paste all that code here. We'll get rid of our new controls line, we'll keep our old one. And now we just need to update our references. So instead of doing this.play, we'll do this, our game object. Now we need to copy over our methods for update velocity and for normalized velocity. So back in our player class, let's copy those two methods. Let's paste them in our state class. And now we just need to update our references. So let's copy this .game object. We'll update our references. We'll have this game object set flip. And so now down in our update velocity method, we want to do this game object our body, and then same thing for our other properties. So now back in our player class, let's get rid of those methods from our class. This now one last change we'll want to do is when there's no input being provided, instead of playing our idle animation, now we want to transition back to our idle state. So let's grab this code here, and we're going to move this up before our other checks. So let's copy this. We'll come up here after we grab our controls. So now if no input is provided, now we want to go to our idle state. So let's jump over to our idle state. I'm going to copy our code here before we change our states. Come back to our move state. Let's get rid of this animation playing, and we want to change to our idle state. Alright, so now back in our player class, we should just now have our code and our update method for calling our state machine update. And then we just create our new states here. Oh, let's get rid of our logic here before we play our idle animation. We want to rely on our idle state to do that for us. So if we clean up our imports, let's save. And now if we come back to our browser, we should be able to test. Alright, so if we start moving our character around, we'll see right away that we changed from our idle state to our movement state. And if we keep our key pressed, we'll see we stay in that state. But the moment we stop providing input, we transition back from our move state to our idle state, and we call on enter. And then we can also see that our animations are now playing for our player, and so now we have our idle animation, and as soon as we start moving, now we're playing our various walking animations. That's it for this part of the series. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And if you're following along, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. If you have any questions or want to share your progress, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.